Hello, and welcome to my discussion of the Discord webcam metagame over the course of 2023 for Camlander. Um, Somebody mentioned that they were curious about a sort of Camlander 2023 year in review, and I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. And nobody else seemed to be stepping up, so I figured, well, I might as well do it myself. This is going to be just sort of me talking about how the webcam metagame has sort of changed and evolved over the course of the year. It's not really going to be super data driven, just sort of general sentiment and things that I remember and sort of trying to tell the story of how the printing of various cards and points changes influenced the webcam metagame. I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video that you know what Canadian Highlander is, also known as Camlander, and that you are familiar with the facts of points lists and the various archetypes. If you don't know what those are, I'm going to have a link to the Discord that I'm talking about. So if you have questions, you can always ask in the comments or you can ask on the Discord. I don't really have a script. I have some outlines. This is mostly me talking sort of off the cuff, so this is probably going to be a pretty long video. So I'll have some timestamps so that people can jump around as they want. I also am probably going to pause frequently in order to rehydrate myself so that I can keep talking. So without further ado, let's sort of get into it. The discussion points that I have are I'm going to talk a little bit about my credentials and sort of my data sources. Again, this is not really super data driven, but I do have a list of all of the winning deck lists for the webcam events over the course of the year. Then after that, I kind of want to give some introduction to what the metagame was at the end of 2022, sort of leading into 2023. And then after that, there's been sort of three main time frames for the metagame on the Discord. And I think that there's sort of the spring session, which was sort of the rise and fall of initiative decks. Then during the summer, there was a lot of combo Lord of the Rings and sort of the lurking threat of Flash Hulk. And then finally, in the last part of the year, in the fall that just ended, sort of a lot of blue control experimentation and some artifact combo running around. And then finally, I'm going to, give sort of closing thoughts on sort of how the metagame has evolved, what sort of archetypes have risen and actually kind of disappeared, and looking towards 2024. And also talk about the most recent points list that dropped, which promises to shake up a lot of things. So I've been an active player in the Discord webcam events for a little over a year, about a year and a half, and I've been a tournament organizer for the last 6 months or so. I also was one of the creators and am the maintainer of the Camlander Winners Archive Moxfield profile, which records all of the top winning lists, the top 2 of all of the weeklies, all of the top 8s of the asyncs, and a lot of other events that are not associated with the Discord. So most of my information is pulled from the webcam weeklies, the asyncs, and the year ends, but I didn't really do a hard data count. It's not like, oh, we had 80% Jeskai and 20% whatever. I don't think that sort of data is extremely meaningful because our webcam events sort of modulate between 12 and 24 people, and they only happen once a week. So that's really not enough data for you to have numbers that really make a lot of sense, and it's just a lot better really I think to look at sort of how the community viewed things and sort of general trends rather than hard data. I'm also not really looking at the general meta share when I looked at the top lists, but it still exists. Just because there were a lot of decks that did win didn't mean that there weren't a lot of decks. There were only a few decks that won, didn't mean that there aren't a lot of decks that were played. If I didn't mention something, it probably didn't mean that it was completely gone. It just means that it wasn't winning a lot. And sort of the last thing I wanted to touch on was that paper events are not technically part of the Discord webcam metagame, but they have a lot of influence in what shows up. There are a lot of archetypes like Reanimator and Time Vault that really didn't see that much play on the Discord, but then they had really good showings and performances in paper tournaments, and it sort of renewed and drived interests in them and brought them back into our metagame. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the end of 2022 leading into 2023. So at the end of 2022, sort of the top decks at the time were Seeker Walk, usually in the Jeskai Green shell, so 4 color, no black. Thoracle Control, which was usually Esper. Uh, Blue-red, Rug Tempo, mid-range, Blitz, really a lot of different variations. Even stuff like Blue Moon was around, and then Death and Taxes. And really the main driving forces at this time were that the format was a lot slower. There wasn't really that much hard combo like Storm running around. And even though Initiative had been released 6 months prior in Baldur's Gate, people hadn't really been experimenting with it very much. People knew that stuff like White Plume Adventurer, Seasoned Engineer, even some of the stuff like Caves of Chaos Adventurer and Undermount Adventurer were really, really good. Death and Taxes had been playing White Plume Adventurer and Seasoned Engineer since day one. But Initiative wasn't super prevalent. It was certainly a thing, but it wasn't dominating the meta. It wasn't a really big concern. And so really decks were a lot slower, which allowed Spellseeker to take advantage of its position in the meta, even though it had recently gone up to 10 points. Thoracle Control, Thoracle really doesn't fight the Initiative super well, but when everything's a little slower, they have a pretty good chance of just controlling the game until they can assemble their combo. And then like the blue-red decks and the rug decks could really leverage stuff like Blood Moon and Price of Progress, which you could still leverage Price of Progress even nowadays, but Blood Moon became a lot less viable when the Initiative gives you a basic. And then Death and Taxes with like Archon of Emeria and all this stuff really put the hamper on a lot of other combo decks, and so Death and Taxes has just always been sort of a mainstay of the format. So that's sort of the end of 2022. And then at the beginning of 2023, well, in the spring period, we had a lot of new cards from Phyrexia All Will Be One and March Machines. And I just want to kind of go over some of the key points that came out. So, like, there were a lot of red and green cards. Bloated Contaminator, Furnace Punishers, and All-Star, Miglaws, Thrun, Rampaging Raptor, Deathbreeder's Champion. These are all, like, super hard-hitting green and red cards, and many of them have soul mana. And really, this was sort of a huge boost to Gruul monsters as an archetype. Gruul monsters obviously had existed, but when you get 8 to 9 new cards for an archetype, that really pushes it towards the forefront of the meta. These were really good at punishing greedy mana bases and just killing people really quick. Cankerbloom is sort of an all-star. It's sort of just a key role player. We had previously had things like Outland Liberator and Kasali Pride Mage, and those were fine, but they were generally 2 power and not as good, whereas Cankerbloom was just 3 power on a 2-drop, which is just a really good rate, while also giving you Artifact and Enchantment Destruction. Abzan decks got Thalia and the Gitrog monster as new top end, Death and Taxes, and some Abzan Taxes decks got Phyrexian Censor, which was like just a brutal new hate bear. One in particular was huge, and I guess Wong too, for Reanimator. Hoarding Broodlord is just basically an upgrade to Runescarred Demon. It technically has combinations with Saw on Half from Infinity, but people haven't really figured out the best shelf for that. It's just mostly used in Reanimator as another good card. Atraxa is absurd. It's become pretty much the best reanimation target that's ever been printed. It's also the best natural order target that's ever been printed. It's not like other formats. It's also the best Oath target. It's not like Vintage where Oath decks are taking over and Atraxa is, sort of everywhere. But it really was a huge, huge upgrade to Reanimator compared to probably their best previous targets were something like Grizzlebrand. And then sort of on the blue side, there was Shieldred's Edict, and Fairy Mastermind was like an instant blue staple, flash, flying, 2 power, draws you extra cards. Shieldred's Edict and Mercurial Spelldancer were just more removal options for sort of the blue-black decks, and Mercurial Spelldancer was actually especially appealing during this time because during this spring season was really the start of the rise of Initiative, and having a 2-drop creature in blue that just gives you value and also is unblockable to just contest Initiative indefinitely is really good. Kaito sort of sat on the sidelines. It's a really good card, but it didn't get much experimentation for a while. But, obviously it came out and won, so I want to talk about it here. There were some points changes near the end of this split where Balance went from 1 to 0, Library of Alexandria went from 1 to 0, Mind Twist went from 1 to 0, Mystical Tutor went from 2 to 1, Summoner's Pact went from 1 to 0, and Survival of the Fittest went from 2 to 1. These didn't really, especially because it came sort of at the end of this section, these didn't really impact this, the decks that showed up during the spring season, but they did have a lot of implications further down the line. So Library of Alexandria was just another strong land that got added to decks like Jeskai or Jeskai Green sometimes. The 4-color decks sometimes had harder times justifying it because it's a colorless land. But it's just a really strong card for control decks. Balance actually didn't really show up in traditional control decks like blue-white control. It didn't really bring back the 2-color control decks like people thought it would. But it started showing up again in decks like Paradox Academy or Time Vault, or sometimes even the Welder variants, just as a way to wipe away creatures because you didn't really play many creatures of your own. Mind Twist shows up in, it didn't have much of an impact, honestly. It shows up in some black decks, some of the blue-black decks. But really the big ones were Mystical Tutor going from 2 to 1. That was a huge boon to blue decks, because it gave them better access to Ancestral Recall and Terminus, which let them control the board better. And it was a boon to Flash Hulk, because it was just another way to get Flash into your hand, or any other of the cards like Summoner's Pact that could go get you Hulk. So Summoner's Pact going to 0 also was a bonus to Flash Hulk. But we didn't really see Flash Hulk start to come into fruition until after these points changes in the summer. And Survival of the Fittest going to 1, it's still really not played very much. It's mostly for creature combo, and creature combo's been kind of dead, honestly. So to talk about the meta for January to May, the main motivation were decks playing the initiative. Now, like I said that people didn't really experiment with the initiative in 2022, and that was kind of true. But in 2023, people realized, well, the initiative is so strong that you can play these really bad cards just because they introduced the initiative. So cards like Aarakocra Sneak, Blood Boil Sorcerer, Passageway Seer, they're not amazing, but they introduced the initiative, and if you can start that initiative snowballing, you can just take over a game. And so there were really 2 sort of veins of initiative decks. There were the Naya, Jund, and 4-color Blood initiative decks. You'd kind of see Abzan sometimes too. And these decks really focused on using Mana Dorks and Soul Mana, and just really trying to get initiative down as fast as possible. Some of the decks like Naya or Blood would even go so far as playing things like Spirit Guides and Lotus Petals, and every source of fast mana that they could, just to try and get like a turn 1 or turn 2 initiative creature. And those were very brittle strategies, but for decks that weren't prepared for them, it was really strong. Decks like Esper or Jeskai Green initiative tended to be a little bit slower. They played in with more counterspells. But even so, they were playing cards that were less powerful. They weren't playing only the cream of the crop initiative creatures. They were playing a lot more of them, which really made them initiative decks. And even though these initiative decks on the Discord meta, they weren't the main winners, every deck had to be prepared for it, because if you weren't prepared for an initiative deck, they would just run you over. If you couldn't go under them and take the initiative, they would go over you. If you couldn't go over them with a combo or some other big thing, you just get run over. You couldn't really play, at the time, there weren't really decks that were what people would call traditional control decks that were playing 10 creatures or 8 creatures, because you just needed to play to the board. Speaking of playing to the board, this is really where Jeskai and Jeskai Green sort of came about. Jeskai Green had been around for a while. People called it Spearmint Jeskai, so if you see that, it's sort of interchangeable. But Jeskai Green was more of just a mid-range deck. It was just trying to play all the biggest, baddest threats. Oko, Minsc and Boo, Omnath, and just sort of go over the top with creature quality. And Jeskai proper hadn't really shown up very much until Impulse on the Discord sort of picked it up as his pet deck and really started fine-tuning it for the meta. And Jeskai and Jeskai Green were sort of some important cards that showed up very frequently were cards like Young Pyromancer or Pyrokinesis, just things that could really play to the board a lot and also be just free interaction, because the initiative decks were so fast, you just needed to get rid of their creatures and have something else to swing back to take the initiative, because usually if you could wrest the initiative from an initiative deck, you would just snowball the game out of control in your favor. So Jeskai and Jeskai Green sort of showed up in order to fight the initiative decks by controlling the board. There were other decks like RDW and the Gruul monsters that I talked about during the new cards, where they said, well, I don't really want to control the board. I'm just going to be faster. I'm going to go under them and just hit harder. So RDW was like a nightmare matchup for a lot of these initiative decks because they dealt a lot of damage while you were busy trying to set up 4-drops. If you introduced the initiative, they usually had way more burn and creatures than you could deal with, so they would just take it from you. So really, all in all, like RDW was a terrible matchup for initiative decks. And Gruul Monsters sort of was similar, but it instead of having more like 1-drops and stuff, it just had these really huge three-drop haymakers and lots of acceleration, and could just sort of go toe to toe with the initiative decks. Sort of the last way that people tried to attack the initiative decks was just by bypassing the board. You know, if you don't play to the board at all and just win with a combo, you don't need to care about the initiative, sort of. You know, the initiative is still pretty fast, but it's not as fast as something like Breachstorm was. So Breachstorm, Jeskai Green, RDW, Gruul Monsters, these are the ones that sort of cropped up during the spring season. And there were some holdovers from 2022. Seeker Walk used some of the new initiative creatures all right. You know, Rug decks were still around, but Rug kind of started to fall off because the red removal just wasn't enough. You know, if someone lands a turn 2 White Plume Adventurer and then it goes and gets the Forge put on it, so it's a 5/5, well, now your Lightning Bolts don't deal with it at all. You need some more non-conditional removal. You need Sourced Plowshares, Path to Exile, that sort of stuff. So, and as I said earlier, Blood Moon is just not really very good when your opponent has, you know, it has like 8 to 12 cards that just find them a basic land as part of their existence. Thoracle also started to decline during this time, and that's because Thoracle really doesn't fight to the board very well, and so it really just didn't fight the initiative against the initiative super well. It also didn't help that the people who were playing Thoracle stopped playing Thoracle. That was sort of the meta breakdown. There were a few decks that popped up that weren't, I wouldn't call them the winning decks or the main decks, but they sort of popped up around the edges or were returning archetypes that had kind of been missing from the Discord meta. So Abzan Atraxa, also called Atraxa Taxes, was an Abzan mid-range deck that sort of just played all of the hate bears, the Thalia, the opposition agents, everything, with a lot of green mana dorks to accelerate them out. And what it did was that it splashed Natural Order in order to get Atraxa. And that's because Atraxa just puts you way over the top. It draws you, you know, 2 to 5 cards and is a giant 7/7 lifelinking flying vigilance monster. This was actually, it did pretty well. It won one of the webcam asyncs, but it didn't really stick around very long. Other decks that came out were Scapeshift. I'm not a historian. I don't know too much about the original Scapeshift, but the newer versions of Scapeshift kind of evolved out of experiments of playing Oath Control, because Oath is another way to fight the initiative, because they have to play to the board. And it turns out that Scapeshift is just a much cleaner win condition. You don't have to play to the board. You can just get rid of everything and then play this, you know, land-based strategy that is not really interacted. You can't really interact with it. And the new Scapeshift decks were different in that they didn't play things like Nature's Lore or Rampant Growths. They basically only played Explore, Growth Spiral, Uro as ways of accelerating to the board, accelerating their land drops, and then they just controlled everything else. It also helped that Scapeshift decks tended to prey on the other blue decks because, again, lands are a lot harder to interact with. Finally, Reanimator came back. That's because Connor H., whose Crayon handles Crayon in the Discord, he took down the face-to-face Vancouver paper tournament with Grixis Reanimator. And before this point, everyone had said Reanimator's like tier 1.5, tier 2, it's not really a competitive deck. And because Connor did so well with Grixis Reanimator, it sort of revived the strategy in the Discord metagame. It was good because Reanimator also really went over the top of initiative decks. You know, you put an Atraxa into play or an Archon of Cruelty, you just don't care about the initiative. So that was the spring season. Moving into the summer season, which is sort of the combo season, and also really the format was shaken up a lot by Lord of the Rings. Like, Lord of the Rings was a messed up set. So, you know, starting on the left here, we've got Flame of Anor, Stern Scolding, Reprieve, Samwise, Thorin Revealed. all these cards are insane cards for the Jeskai control decks. Jeskai Green, Jeskai Black, even moving forward. They just were pretty much instant staples. Stern Scolding goes in and out of lists, but Reprieve and Lorien Revealed are staples in Jeskai decks. Flame of Anor shows up really often. Aragorn is this insane card that just stabilizes the board. Jeskai never had to worry about losing to initiative decks anymore because they had a 4/4 Vigilance Lifelink that made them the Monarch and was essentially unblockable. It's just truly an insane card. Other cards that came out were Fourth Aerlingus. Like this Fourth Aerlingus might be one of the strongest cards that came out this year. It might actually be the strongest card that came out this year. It was really good in Jeskai control decks, in Boros, in Red-White Death and Taxes. Any deck that could feasibly play this card did play this card, and it was good. Other cards for Naya were Aemir, King of Rohan. That was really good in like Naya Winota. It's a human, does a lot of damage, gives you the Monarch. Delighted Halfling was a great pickup for stuff like Gruul Monsters because it let you fight the counterspell decks by just having a on-rate mana dork that was a 1/2, so it didn't die to a lot of stuff like Ren and 6. And then it just made all your really problematic cards like Minsc and Boo uncounterable. Boromir was also another good card for something like Death and Taxes. Death and Taxes at this point had sort of taken on a human sub-theme, and Boromir being an on-rate human with a relevant hate effect and protection was really good. Other cards that came out, Orcish Bowmasters, basically revitalized black as a color for fair decks. For a long time in 2022 and the early part of 2023, there was not really a good reason to play fair black decks. Opposition Agent and Hand Attack are obviously really good, but they just weren't worth splashing for, especially when you were playing control decks or mid-range decks. And Orcish Bowmasters really changed that, because Bowmasters does everything. It punishes the blue decks, it fights to the board really well, it picks off little things. It's just like a phenomenal card. Will of Khazad-dûm, it sees some play in mid-range decks. It really actually was a pretty big pickup for Reanimator, because it was another monster that was actually worth reanimating, because it's 6/5 with essentially triple menace. It ends games really quickly, while also giving you more consistency by letting you hit your land drops. The One Ring is a pretty powerful card. Honestly, the One Ring didn't make as much of a splash in this format as it did in stuff like Modern or Legacy, because we don't have multiple One Rings, so you can't draw into another One Ring to then play it and reset your counters and prevent yourself from dying. You're just less likely to see it. So it didn't really take over this format, but it was a huge boost to artifact strategies like Paradox Academy or Time Vault, because they already wanted to play artifacts and stuff like Tolarian Academy. They already wanted to draw cards. It just synergized perfectly. Something like Sauron's Ransom is actually a really interesting card that I think just doesn't see as much play as it should, because it's a huge pain to resolve on webcam. Flipping the piles up and down on webcam is just way too time consuming. But it was another boost to trying out maybe a blue-black core instead of a Jeskai core. Of course, in the same set, we also got Aragorn and Fourth Aerlingus, so why would you move away from Jeskai? But it was still there. And then finally, like the last important card that I think came out was Samwise Gamgee. I had talked a little bit in the last section about how Flash Hulk got 2 more points from Mystical going from 2 to 1 and Summoner's Pact going from 1 to 0. And earlier, I don't think it was early in the year, I think it was in 2022, Protean Hulk actually went from 2 points to 0. So Flash Hulk had gotten 4 points over the course of time and still really wasn't seeing play. It was starting to get a little bit of experimentation, and then Samwise Gamgee came out and really just changed everything. So the thing about Samwise Gamgee, I'm not going to go super deep into the combo, but with Samwise Gamgee, Ginger Brute, Cauldron Familiar, Viserys Seer, and Sylvan Safekeeper, the Flash Hulk combo essentially can't be interacted with. You used to be able to fight it with targeted Grave Hate, like Endurance or Scavenging Ooze. No, you can't do that anymore. You have to have an unreasonable amount of removal spells or Graveyard Hate spells in order to go over the top of the current Flash Hulk pile. So it really was only interactable by counterspells, Stifle, Dress Down. And, these are all blue cards, so that meant only blue decks could fight Flash Hulk. You had a few others like Opposition Agent or Sanctifier and Vec, some Hate Bears, but really Flash Hulk got a huge power upgrade because Samwise Gamgee created the most uninteractable pile for Flash Hulk that's ever existed. So going into the meta breakdown, what really moved the metagame? Well, previously in spring, initiative decks were the main motivators for the metagame, and now it was Flash Hulk. Flash Hulk actually didn't put up that many results on the Discord, but part of that was it didn't really have many people who played it, and also all the people who were the top players, all the top competitors, all teched against Flash Hulk because they were always concerned about it showing up because it was the scariest combo deck of the time. It had a new pile. It had gotten 4 points, maybe 5. There might be a point that I'm missing, but it got 4 new points, and it was just an insane, insane deck. The rich get richer. Jeskai and Jeskai Green, they got all these goodies, Fourth Aerlingus, Aragorn, so many good things from Lord of the Rings. So they just took an even bigger part of the meta share because their decks just got better. Death and Taxes got a little bit of an upswing. They got some new things with Boromir, and also just they had the relevant hate bears to fight the Flash Hulk decks, and so they really just Death and Taxes never truly leaves, but it does cycle back and forth between less and more or less popularity. Gruul Monsters also, got Delighted Halfling and was one of the decks that was actually fast enough, consistently fast enough to fight Flash Hulk. If Flash Hulk ever stumbled, Gruul Monsters would just take them out. Whereas something like RDW, really, RDW has more explosive stuff. It's more likely to kill you on turn 5, kind of guaranteed, but you're more likely to die on turn 5. Whereas Gruul Monsters, if it's not being interacted with, just has a much faster clock because it's not doing shocks and stuff. It's hitting you with 4 power creatures. There were some adaptations to fight combo. I talked a little bit about using a blue-black core. So Jeskai Black was sometimes more like Grixis White than it was Jeskai Splashing Black, but it was kind of like the opposite of Jeskai Green. Like, if you play Jeskai, you have a pretty even matchup spread across the field. If you play Jeskai Green, you have a much better time into other mid-range decks and other fair decks because the green cards you get are just super high quality cards, Minskin Oko, that sort of thing, that really dominate the fair matchups. But you lose a little bit against combo because most of your good cards that you get from splashing are higher up on the curve. Jeskai Black, instead of splashing green, you splash black. What you do is you lose some of your percentage points against the other fair decks, but you get access to Hand Attack and Thoughtseize, Duress, Inquisition. Some decks even played Mind Twist because, twisting your opponent for 3 is devastating. You counter some of their spells, and then on turn 4 you twist them for 3 is really strong. You get Opposition Agent, you get Orcish Bowmasters. So Jeskai Black really gave you a lot of game against combo that Jeskai Green didn't, but you lost a little bit of percentage points against the fair axis. Other decks that sort of held over, Reanimator stuck around. Reanimator and Storm sort of had a little bit of a decline because Flash Hulk was so dominant at the time, even though it didn't win many events. Flash Hulk was so obviously really powerful that there was very little incentive to play a different combo deck. If you were going to play a combo deck, you wanted to play the one that was the fastest, had the least amount of interaction possible, and got to play the most amount of slots in order to find its combo and protect its combo. And that was Flash Hulk. So Reanimator and Storm sort of fell by the wayside. Reanimator still stuck around. I think it's just more popular than Storm. And Scapeshift also stuck around a little bit because it was still pretty good against the other blue decks, but it was not very good at pressuring Flash Hulk, and also it didn't have a really good matchup against stuff like Death and Taxes or Gruul Monsters because it fought the board well against Initiative because Initiative was playing like really clunky 4-drops that were 4-mana 3/3s that introduced the Initiative. It was less good against going Mana Dork into Lelia into Minskin Boo, followed up by just too much pressure. So this was kind of the meta for the summer, and there were a couple of decks that started to come up near the end of the summer split, and those decks were Paradox Academy and Time Vault. Now, these decks are not new; they've been around for forever, but they kind of had fallen by the wayside for a little bit. Paradox Academy had really been sort of a tier 2 deck, whatever you want to classify it, for a while. But with balance going to 0, that gave them a free point that they were able to use really well for making sure that they could stay alive. You know, if you balance your Gruul monster's opponent, remove 4 of their creatures and 1 of their lands, it feels amazing. Mystical Tutor going to 1 was actually pretty huge because it gave them better access to Tinker, which really, Tinker is the strongest part of the Paradox Academy deck, not the wheels in the Paradox Academy, or in the Paradox engine. And then finally, like, the One Ring was crazy good for Paradox Academy because it's already a deck that wants to play a bunch of mana rocks, wants to play a bunch of artifacts, has a bunch of artifact tutors, and plays a card that untaps all of your non-land permanents when you cast a spell. Well, the One Ring is a non-land permanent that draws you cards. Like, the One Ring was insane for Paradox Academy. It was a really huge shot in the arm for Paradox Academy to come back. Sort of similar to Paradox Academy, Time Vault had been sort of around for a little bit. People had been experimenting it with it in welder shells and all this stuff, and it hadn't really been making too many waves. You know, it had always been around, but never was super top tier. But with the printing of more busted Magic cards that had low pip requirements, and of course the One Ring, it was a lot easier to make a Time Vault deck that just played a bunch of the really good cards and had the Time Vault combo sort of just nestled in. And Joel H., who's JCK Knox on the Discord, sort of helped bring more interest by placing the top 4 of MXP Tacoma, I believe it was Saturday, using a pretty unconventional black-white initiative Time Vault build. Now, Time Vault's not really been a black-white initiative deck since, but it did bring more eyes to look at the archetype and sort of figure out what could be done using Time Vault. So that was the summer meta. That leads us into the most recent meta, which was fall, September to December. And there's some new cards from Woe, Wilds of Eldraine, Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and then one card from the Lord of the Rings holiday set, I think it's called. The only card that was relevant from the holiday set was Legolas's Quick Reflexes. Instant split second, it protects your creature, it's a removal spell, it does everything. Really, the only reason it hasn't shown up very much is that there's just not a lot of green decks running around. Green decks have sort of fallen by the wayside because there's been so much red removal in dealing with, really dealing with initiative and dealing with other mid-range decks. The value of things like Fury and Pyrokinesis had gone way up. Other cards from Woe and Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Get Lost it's still in testing, it's not in a lot of lists, but it's a solid removal spell. Stalactite Stalker was a good card for goblins to pick up. Malcolm has been sort of some tempo pilots have been testing with it. Questing Druid and Tishana's Tidebinder have seen play in control decks because they're just powerful. They're just powerful effects. Stapling a Stifle to a 3/2 body with flash is good, especially when it shuts off whatever it stifles forever. Questing Druid is just card advantage and also sometimes a grow creature, and they've just been. They haven't made waves, but they've been present. Hopping on the artifact train, Deathbro's Reliquary was a huge removal spell pickup for a deck like Time Vault. Even Paradox Academy is picking it up. So, Thousand Moons Smithy, it hasn't seen a ton of play because it's basically just a 4-mana construct, but, it's seen some experimentation. Fabrication Foundry is a way to rebuy Time Vault while also being a mana rock for artifacts, which is good for, again, Time Vault. Even the red decks sort of got some love. Broadside Bombardiers. It's, Lost Caverns of Ixalan is still pretty new, so these haven't changed the meta a ton. But Broadside's an insane card. Being able to throw Furies or Chromoxes and other things that you don't need anymore to deal damage is insane. Embereth Veteran and Charming Scoundrel were just really solid 1 and 2 drops for stuff like RDW. Inti is also a really solid 2-drop for all the various, red and red X decks. It's just grows your creatures, gives them trample, gives you card selection. It just does everything you want. And sort of this last column has been, it's what I call sort of combo cards. So Bitter Triumph might not seem like a combo card, but it's really good for Reanimator because it's an instant speed way of putting a monster in the bin while also destroying a creature or a planeswalker. It's basically like a Bone Shards. I don't want to say better because it's 2 mana, but instant speed is really good. Wail of the Forgotten is seeing a little bit of play in stuff like Breach Storm because it's essentially just a strategic planning. but occasionally when you need it to be, it's a bounce spell or a discard spell. And then Besiege the Mirror, we don't really have the density in order for it to take over the format like it does, I don't want to say take over the format, for it to have a huge impact like in Legacy or Vintage, but it's a really powerful spell. It's seen some experimentation in Doomsday Shells and other combo setups. It hasn't really, it's not changed the format significantly, but it is one of the more impactful printings from Wilds of Eldraine, which was actually a much lower power level set. So there were some points changes at the beginning of this split, and relatively at the beginning, Monday, October 2nd, where crop rotation went from 1 to 0, price of progress went from 1 to 0, transmute artifact went from 1 to 0, and flash went from 5 to 7. Now, crop rotation really was a huge boon to any deck playing Tolarian Academy, and was in green, because Tolarian Academy, while only being a 1-point card, you really wanted to play crop rotation to find Tolarian Academy. So it felt like you were paying 2 points just for the privilege of playing Tolarian Academy. Obviously, crop rotation can get things like Urza Saga, Strip Mine, Wasteland, Krakus. It's a very versatile card, but its use as a fair card is pretty limited. It hasn't really made a lot of waves. It hasn't really revitalized like the lands archetype or anything. Maybe the strongest thing that it's done is getting Urza Saga at this point, if it's not getting Tolarian Academy. But in those decks, I'm not sure it was a 1-point card anyway. It's really only been a huge boon to the artifact strategies like Paradox Academy and Time Vault. Price to progress going from 1 to 0 was a big buff to RDW, Gruul Monsters, and the like. It was originally made to sort of curb the greed of 4-color decks. I don't think it's actually done that. 4-color decks still are really strong. They're still everywhere. It turns out if you die to price of progress, you die to price of progress, but it doesn't show up often enough that you need to worry about it. But it did give some points to, some aggressive decks that didn't need to pay a point for price of progress. Transmute Artifact is a pretty bad spell, and pretty much is only seen play in Time Vault. It was a little bit of a boost to Time Vault because they're very happy to turn a signet or a talisman into Time Vault. It's pretty much not seen play anywhere else. And then Flash going from 5 to 7, Flash was the boogeyman of the format for the summer, and this was sort of the response to fixing the problems. Really the points that Flash had gained earlier were perfectly reasonable until the printing of Samwise Gamgee, and so Flash is just the way of correcting. Flash going to 7 is the way to correct that. I think it might have been a little bit of an overcorrection because Flash is now completely gone. Maybe not completely gone. It's just not really a competitively top-tier deck anymore, which is okay, but it's a lot less consistent than it was. So, moving from the points to the meta breakdown, at this point I've mentioned them so many times, but Jeskai and Jeskai Green were like the main pillars of the format. The initiative had come and gone, Flash Hulk had come and gone. The only thing left around was Jeskai and Jeskai Green. But sort of a difference between the Jeskai and Jeskai Green of the spring and the summer and the Jeskai and Jeskai Green of the fall is that they looked a lot more like control decks now. They often had 14 or less creatures. Obviously they had planeswalkers, so when you count 14 creatures and 6 or 7 planeswalkers, it's still 20 something threats. But they didn't look like the 20 to 24 creature decks that they were earlier in the year. They'd really slimmed down, and part of that was just because the printing of cards like Fourth Aerlingus and Aragorn, you just didn't need to play these low-impact creatures like Young Pyromancer, Mercurial Spelldancer. You could just play the really impactful things and then control everything else. So, obviously comment on that forth. Turns out when you pair Force of Will and Ancestral Recall and Lightning Bolt and Swords of Plowshares with everything, you can just play all the most broken stuff and pair it with Force of Will, and it's really good. So, sort of as a way to fight against Jeskai and Jeskai Green, were these artifact combo decks. And I mentioned it sort of at the end of the summer split, but the fall split really saw the rise of stuff like Paradox Academy, Time Vault, Turbo Ring, which is sort of a spin on Paradox Academy that just doesn't use wheels and focuses on Bolsa Citadel and One Ring shenanigans. And really, Time Vault got a huge boost in visibility when Joking 101 took first place in the House of Cards paper tournament and then second place in the Cosmic Games tournament later in the year. And this is, two pretty high profile events. And Joking also was famous because he beat down a lot of Jeskai and Jeskai Green players on his way to getting first and second. So, Time Vault became sort of the Jeskai killer. And really, the reason why these artifact synergies took off is because when you're playing a combo deck, the control deck has to respect the fact that you can combo and thus has a lot of pressure on its counterspells to do things. But the artifact mid-range backup plan of stuff like Academy and Time Vault, which mostly just involved lots of mana from Tolarian Academy and also really giant creatures from Urza Saga, just really lined up super well against the game plan of Jeskai and Jeskai Green of dealing with things by using 1-for-1 removal and then recouping card advantage with Ancestral Recall. When your Urza Saga makes a 4-4 construct and a 5-5 construct and also tutors half of your combo, then your control opponent can't just use a lightning bolt and call it a day. They have to kill the 2 constructs. They have to deal with the thing that came out of the Urza Saga. It's a mess. And then, at the same time, you go to kill everything else, and your artifact opponent lands a One Ring or a Shorikai, and suddenly they're getting more cards than you are. So really, these artifact synergies propped up the artifact combo decks and really helped them prey on the fair blue decks. And so much so that the fair blue decks even started adapting to playing things like Brotherhood's End, some of them playing like a Braid, Flame of Anor, just a lot more artifact removal. While Jeskai and Jeskai Green were sort of the main pillars, there was a lot of experimentation with other types of control decks. Check, which is 4-color, no white, Esper red, Grixis white, 5-color control. These were all things that people experimented with because the blue core had become so strong that you could really do pretty much anything with it. They all had slightly different matchup spreads and ways that they played into each other. 5-color was really the greediest, but went over the top. Where Jeskai Green went over the other fair decks by adding green, 5-color because you had everything just went over the top even more, but was slower. It's really, there was just every single combination of 4 and 5-color blue decks under the sun was played. Some holdovers were Reanimator. Reanimator's still good. I would hesitate to say it's ever been the top of the meta, but it's always been a good choice ever since it got reintroduced into the meta back in, I want to say spring. Yeah, back in spring with Crayon, bringing it back. Decks that were in decline, Flash Hulk basically disappeared after losing 2 points. Scape Shift kind of disappeared. Part of that is just people moved away from it. They stopped wanting to play it, but also you just didn't necessarily need the game plan of having a bunch of mountains in your deck so that you could enable Valakut was really clunky. You wouldn't think it's clunky because there's all these triomes and everything, but you didn't want to draw too many of them, and it just didn't feel necessary when you had all these haymakers like Fourth Aerlingus, Comet. You didn't need it. You didn't need the combo control win con when you could just play a normal control game. Finally, the people that were punching the greed were the RDW decks, Gruul Blitz, Gruul Monsters. All these things had price of progress, got benefited from price of progress going down. Some of the recent printings, they weren't massive changes, but they slightly improved the 1s and the 2 drops, maybe some 3 drops. Honestly, RDW, Gruul Monsters, they're always going to be present. It's just whether or not they're at the top is, sort of just changes with the times. Some fringe decks that started coming around, and this is the most recent time frame, so it's kind of hard to say, well, these things are going to become mainstream or they took over anything because this happened, some of these things happened only a month ago or less. So some fringe decks that came up were stuff like Saga or Academy Control, um, basically building on the idea of these artifact combo decks are really good against blue decks, which are a huge part of the meta. Why don't we just keep leaning into artifact synergies? So you don't necessarily need a combo deck, or you don't need a combo in the deck. You could just play things like wanting to recur Saga over and over using Light from the Loam, wanting to use Thopter Sword, Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek to just make a bunch of Thopters and grind everything out. Some decks use Painter Grindstone. This is a pretty unexplored, a relatively unexplored archetype, but it was starting to pop up near the end of the year. And then another deck that was kind of fringe that started to pop up was a deck called Schmedium Red. Apologies, I had to take a drink. Medium Red had been a contender for a long time in Canadian Highlander, and that was a deck that played a lot of soul mana with Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, all the big dragons and all that stuff. And really, Gruul Monsters replaced Medium Red for the most part, because Gruul Monsters does what Medium Red does, but better. It has higher card quality. The dorks mean that you're fast mana. You don't need to have an opening that has your super pointed cards in order to function. It's just better. It sort of filled the same niche of playing 5-drops and stuff. So you didn't always want to just play RDW, though, because playing Shocks is not always the best game plan. Yeah, it's reach, but it's also, pretty inefficient in terms of damage per card. So Schmedium Red was kind of in between Medium Red and RDW, where you compress the curve of Medium Red so that you only top out with a few 4s, and you mostly have 3s. And you have a lot more creatures than something like RDW, because instead of having burn spells, you have more 2s and 3-drops. But what you get to do is you get to still use stuff like Mana Crypt and Ancient Tomb and City of Traders, which RDW doesn't really get to use. So you get these sort of power spikes that RDW doesn't have, but you get to be lower to the ground than something like Medium Red. And this deck, it's not taken over anything, but it's starting to pop up a little bit. So that was really the fall meta. So now that I've talked about sort of the overall story of how the meta has evolved over the course of the year, I wanted to just talk about a bunch of different archetypes individually. So blue midrange and control really had a huge uptick. In 2023. And blue's always been good. It's an eternal format. There's Force of Will, there's Ancestral Recall. Those cards are just good. But what really propped up the blue midrange decks and the blue control decks is actually the printing of cards like Triumph of St. Catherine, Comet Stellar Pup, Minsk and Boo, Timeless Heroes, Fourth Aerolingus. None of these cards are blue. So why is this making blue decks better? Well, when you have your top 15 to 20 threats of the format are just so much better than everything else in the format, you don't need to play the second 15 to 20 threats. If you can get away with playing the first 15 to 20 threats, then you can fill out your deck with cards that make your deck more consistent, which are cantrips, universal removal, which are counterspells. Counterspells give you game against every single archetype in the format. And you get card advantage with things like Ancestral Recall and Treasure Cruise and, Lorien Revealed. Obviously, there were a lot of blue cards that were printed that were actually blue. But there were so many good threats that were pip-light. They didn't require, it's not like the old Jeskai where you had to play Brimaz and Mantis Rider and all these things that were, super pip-dense. You could just play these things that had very few colored pips in them and splash for everything and use a blue core to give you consistency and interaction. This actually kind of leads into the non-blue, the fall of non-blue 3 and 4 color mid-range, which is Naya, Jund, Abzan, 4 color Blood, that sort of stuff. While those decks saw some play at the height of the initiative meta because they're the colors with the best initiative threats, again, when your top 15 to 20 threats are so good, you don't need to be stretching your mana base to 3 or 4 colors and playing the next best 15 to 20 threats. It's just not worth the difficulty in building a mana base, the pain that comes from having more shock lands or pain lands. Sometimes you have to play in like 4-color Blood, would often play City of Brass and Mana Confluence, and sometimes you'd have 3 to 4 Horizon lands. You just didn't need to do that because the card quality, the threat quality had gone up so much. Now you could just play 1 to 2 color decks like Gruul Monsters that were able to better utilize things like Soul Mana, or if you wanted to splash all of the design mistakes, you could just play blue. So really, this was that's the reason why blue really came to the forefront in 2023 is the same reason that non-blue 3 to 4 color mid-range sort of declined. Creature combo also declined, and it's been kind of on the downswing for a while, but really, Initiative changed everything. Even though Initiative is not the top dog of the format. It's never really been the top dog of the format, and it's not even that big of an influence anymore. The Initiative had people tighten up their interaction suites. Instead of playing things like Vindicate or Council's Judgment or Kolaghan's Command, you're playing, Swords of Plowshares, Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, Pyrokinesis is not super popular anymore, but, Fury, Forked Bolt, Fire Ice, you're playing all these things that just are really efficient and kill a lot of things. And the problem with Creature Combo is that Creature Combo has two main flaws. It's slower than all-in combo decks like Storm it's slower than non-creature combo decks like Storm or Doomsday or, what have you, because creatures have summoning sickness. You need a lot of things in play. You need a lot of mana. And also, it's just vulnerable in a way that non-creature combo decks aren't, because almost every deck in the format has to interact with creatures in some way. This is not like, Legacy, where you might have a Storm deck that has 0 removal spells, or Vintage, where you have a deck that has 0 removal spells in the main board, and they might bring in some stuff for hate permanents post-board. Here in Canlander, every deck can deal with creatures to some degree. And so really that means that when you need a lot of mana or resources, and every deck can interact with you, you just don't really have much of a chance. Something like Kiki Pod required you to spend a bunch of life on Birthing Pod, have Birthing Pod survive, have your creature that you were going to pod survive, have the thing that you're podding into survive. It's a lot of stuff. Pattern Rector, you needed to have a sacrifice outlet and a Pattern Rector and another creature to put the Pattern of Rebirth onto, and also it lost to Graveyard Hate. And you need 3 things. Crater Hoof, I didn't list Hoof here, but Crater Hoof, you need like 4 mana dorks to do anything. It's just not feasible. Seeker Walk is the best of the creature combo decks because it's the most compact. Spellseeker is, you just need to resolve Spellseeker and not have it interacted with and you win. But Spellseeker dies to everything. It's a 1/1, so it dies to, Forked Bolt, Lightning Bolt, Revolt, Fatal Push, Cut Down, Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, any sort of anti-search, Opposition Agent, even Mind Sensor, any sort of anti-cast spells at instant speed, Teferi Time Raveler. It's just so much stuff interacts with it that creature combo really just doesn't really have much of a chance. And I'm going to talk in a second about the points that have been announced for the new year that might revitalize a little bit of creature combo, but honestly, creature combo needs either a fundamental redesign from the ground up, or it needs new busted cards printed for it that serve dual purposes. Because the gap between the average threat quality and the synergy pieces you need in your creature combo decks is just so high now that they just can't really compete. Moving on from creature combo, lands decks. Lands is sort of in a weird spot because, sort of like creature combo, a lot of the land synergy pieces are just not very good cards anymore. Ramunap Excavator, Corsair Crewfix, these are below rate creatures. That's a 2/3 for 3, a 2/4 for 3. Dryad of the Elysian Grove is a 2/4 for 3. Crucible Worlds doesn't play to the board at all. All these land synergy pieces, Zernorb's like only good for comboing usually. Fast Bond is, again, mostly good for comboing. Your synergy pieces just aren't at the same quality as the average mid-range deck, so trying to fold your land synergy pieces into a mid-range deck just makes a weaker mid-range deck, usually. Um, and trying to strip lock somebody, trying to wasteland or strip lock somebody is a lot harder to do when they play a White Plume Adventurer that then gives them a land, that then gives them an emblem that you have to fight, and if you don't, you're just going to die. Um, yeah, lands has just been it's been kind of rough. There's been some success. I believe Discord user Nick Heisen has been experimenting with some combo land stuff, and combo land still has some applications, but it's rough. Even stuff like Dark Depths, Thespian Stage is not good anymore. Not that good anymore because there's just so many answers to Merit Lage. There's Solitude. There's Portable Hole. There's Duskrose Reliquary, Prismatic Ending, Teferi Time Raveler, Brazen Bar, where there's been a lot more answers to those types of things. And then setting up like Fast Bond loops it's like a 3-card combo. It's just very hard to assemble. That's not to say that lands is dead, but it's definitely struggled since the introduction of the initiative because it doesn't tend to fight to the board very well. Any sort of typal decks or kindred decks, I think they're called now, that aren't goblins or humans have just been suffered because the synergy that you need for a typal deck to work is just requires you to include cards that are such low quality, are so low in quality compared to your average mid-range card. When you look at I'm trying to think of a good card, but when you look at even like Veldalian Hexcatcher versus Minsc and Boo, it's just like not even close. Why would you include such a thing? Goblins has still stuck around because it turns out there are a lot of really good goblins for an aggro shell, and they also just have an Oops I Win button with Goblin Recruiter, so that gives them some play. And humans, there's not really like a humans typal deck, but a lot of Death and Taxes decks have had human synergies or sub themes, and those decks have been done well because Death and Taxes is a good deck. But other typal decks have not fared so well. The zombies, the elves, etc. Deck like Thoracle Control. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but Thoracle really doesn't fight the board very well, and that's fine because we're not necessarily at the height of the initiative like we were in the spring. But if you have a deck that loses when your opponent resolves a White Plume Adventurer or can't combat a Minsc and Boo or a Comet very well, that's kind of a problem. Thoracle usually exists in the Esper Wedge, which unfortunately makes it not in any of the colors for the super busted mid-range sets that have been printed. If you try to make your Thoracle deck 4 or 5 color, you get better mid-range quality, mid-range threat quality, but you then look more like a Jeskai or Jeskai Green deck that decided to not play Ancestral Recall and lose 7 points for no reason. And, really, most Thoracle control decks were on Thoracle, Tainted Pact, Gifts Ungiven, because Gifts was 2 points. And that's, setting up the Thoracle combo is really difficult to do because most of the tutors don't overlap. It's a creature and it's an instant or sorcery. They're both instants, actually, Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact. And setting up a gifts pile, the best gifts pile that your opponent can give you for them is, because the gifts pile is Snapcaster Mage, Thoracle, Demonic Consultation, Unearth, is to give you Snapcaster Mage and Thoracle, which means you need 1 triple blue black in order to do your combo. And I don't know how you're going to ever protect that combo against another blue deck that has counterspells when you're spending 1 triple blue black to try to execute it. Thoracle just doesn't layer with anything, it doesn't meld into anything. It's not like Time Vault, which has obvious artifact synergies. It's just this, its strength is that it's a standalone combo that is really compact, and its weakness is that it's a standalone combo that doesn't synergize with anything. So Thoracle control's kind of fallen off the face of the earth. There's still been a little bit of Thoracle played in stuff like Doomsday, but Thoracle, for being a 7-point card, is not seen as much play as you would think. Strategies like Blue Moon and Rug Moon, they've kind of fallen off the face of the earth as well because the initiative gets you a basic. the Lord of the Rings land cyclers can get you basics. Um, you know, there have been all these threats like Triumph of St. Catherine that have been printed that are just gigantic and are nearly impossible to remove with red removal. There's just not really a good reason to lose white or black in terms of removal and interaction. And blood mooning people as a main plan, blood mooning people to lock them out has never been a more difficult game plan. Uh, you can still definitely lock people out with Blood Moon. There's a lot of greedy mana bases running around, but it's just really hard to do so. I mean, I can give an example where a few days ago someone tutored up a Magus of the Moon against me, and I was playing a control deck and I had 0 basic lands in play, but I had a March of Otherworldly Light in my hand, so they played their Magus of the Moon, I floated 2 white, and then I marched their Magus of the Moon and went about my day. It's just, it's way too difficult to set up moonlocks in the modern era. Finally, stuff like Storm. Storm actually might be coming back. When I first made my outline for this, Storm kind of had fallen by the wayside, uh, because Storm really suffers from the fact that it actually gets interacted with by a lot more things than you think. The printing of Canker Bloom and Boseiju and Endurance are just all these ways that can interact with Storm in ways you don't expect. March of Otherworldly Light, a prismatic ending that's made into an instant speed by Teferi Time Raveler. There's just a lot of things that actually incidentally affect Storm, and it's still a good deck. You play a deck, and if it's really fast, it'll get underneath people, and it'll, take games. But it's surprisingly able to be interacted with, and that's just generally not been the case for a lot of these other combo decks that have been seeing success. It's not that the other combo decks don't have interaction points, except Flash Hulk when it was dominant. It's the fact that they have realistic backup plans, and Storm really doesn't have a backup plan. It is very all in. That being said, it's still a good deck, and I actually might be making a resurgence when I talk about the new points for the new year. So, when I was first writing my my outline, these points hadn't been announced. And then as I was getting ready to make this video, these were announced and I had to modify everything. So, effective January 1st. So, by the time this is going to be out after January 1st, so these will be in effect. Huge amount of points changes, 9-point changes. Ancestral Recall went from 7 to 8. Birthing Pod went from 1 to 0. Gifts Ungiven went from 2 to 1. Umazawa's Jite went from 2 to 1. Spellseeker went from 3 to 2. Fourth Aerolingus went from 0 to 1. Natural Order went from 3 to 2. Demonic Tutor went from 4 to 3. And Strip Mine went from 3 to 2. I think these are going to have big changes on the metagame, but maybe not in the way that you would think. So, Ancestral Recall going from 7 to 8 is obviously, and let's just talk about Ancestral Recall and Fourth together because they're kind of related. Ancestral Recall going from 7 to 8 and Fourth going from 0 to 1 really taxes the Jeskai and Jeskai Green decks, all the decks that were touching Jeskai that played Ancestral Recall, because that's just 2 more points that they previously free rolled. Ancestral Recall is a really powerful card. A lot of the blue decks really lean on their Ancestral Recall and or Treasure Cruise in order to refuel, to do with their 1-for-1 removal. And Fourth Aerolingus was like the best early, mid-game, and late-game card for those decks. Early game it would give them a Monarch that would just set them up for card advantage for forever. Late game it was a Fireball that just killed your opponent. And this is gonna make blue decks shift, I think. Some people I've been talking to on the Discord seem to think that Ancestral Recall at 8 is still the best spread for some decks. More power to them. I think that's a little crazy because paying 8 points for your one card seems like a lot. But this does open up experimentation with blue control decks that are not in the Jeskai wedge. So check decks, bug, even like Grixis White that are not playing Recall. I think that there's going to be some experimentation with mox spreads, or ring spreads. Soul Ring is a really strong card to give you more mana for things like Lorien Revealed and power out Minsc Boos. Who knows? I think there's going to be more experimentation in the blue control group, and I don't think it's going away. Blue control is still really good, even with Recall going to 8 and Fourth going to 1. One of the adaptations that people might make is this Gifts Ungiving going to 1 gives you more options for setting up things like Loam control strategies that, use Gifts Ungiven and Intuition to find Loam, probably Wasteland, maybe Strip Mine. Now the Strip Mines too. Strip Mine going down is also helpful for those kinds of strategies. I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation with blue decks, but there's still going to be a pretty large presence in the metagame. Birthing Pod going to 0 and Spellseeker going to 2. Technically, these are both improvements to Seeker Walk, but Seeker Walk is a creature combo deck, and as I mentioned when I was talking about the individual archetypes, creature combo is really not doing so well. It's definitely a power increase, but I don't think it's going to put Seeker Walk over the top, or any creature combo deck for that matter. Pod going to 0 maybe will encourage some experimentation. I think that the fact that Pod is 0 and now Spellseeker plus Thoracle plus Tainted Pact is 10 points might give you a Neoform Thoracle Seeker deck that previously didn't exist. But I don't expect this to really shake up the meta a ton. I think it's interesting and it's going to give some experimentation, but I don't think it's going to drastically change much. Umezawa's GTA goes to 1. It's a reason to play Jund or Naya and go triple Mox GTA, but also if you're going Naya, you could go triple Mox 4th Aerlingus, because you probably still want 4th Aerlingus. If you're going Jund, you probably still want triple Mox Tainted Pact, same with Abzan. GTA's kind of a relic of the past. It's a very mana intensive, and it really thrives in grindy board-based matchups, which have not been characteristic of the Discord meta. The Discord meta has been a lot of blue, mid-range, and control, and a lot of combo, and GTA doesn't really help there. And even against decks like Gruul Monsters has a lot of ways of instantly killing a GTA with their Miglaws, or with their Cankerbloom, or just having giant creatures that you can't ever profitably trade with to get counters on your GTA. I don't expect GTA to actually make any difference whatsoever in the Discord meta. GTA going to Natural Order going to 2. I think that's a little scary, because Natural Order was already pretty powerful. It was just kind of underrepresented. And I still don't think it's going to make that much of a difference, because most people, when they build Natural Order decks, are still building them where Natural Order is just a high roll. And now that it's only 2 points, having Natural Order just as being a high roll in your deck like a Moxen is probably fine. You stick an Atraxa in your deck, and sometimes you draw your Natural Order, and you get your Atraxa on turn 3 or 4, and then sometimes you just hardcast your Atraxa, and that's good. I don't expect this to drastically change the meta, because I don't think that the Natural Order piles prey on any of the decks that currently are at the top of the meta, but I'm all for seeing new experimentation. Demonic Tutor going from 4 to 3. It's definitely a boost to decks like Lotusless Storm and Reanimator. It's not embarrassing anymore as a fair card. If you wanted to go, some sort of Jund build or something, it's still not great, because 3 points is still a lot. I don't expect it to make that much of a difference going forward, but it's good. It's a good change. Strip Mine going to 2 is actually pretty nice. It sits in sort of an awkward position, because if you wanted to go, for example, Mox Strip Mine, you have 2 points left over, and it's kind of hard to fit that into a lot of decks. But where Strip Mine going to 2 is really powerful is it's actually a really big boost to Death and Taxes and Schmedium Red, which tended to run Crypt plus Mox beforehand, and now they can run Crypt plus Mox plus Strip Mine. And that's a pretty big boon to those archetypes, and I don't think it's gonna, I don't think we're gonna see the return of lands, although you could see maybe there's some land stuff with Demonic Tutor and Strip Mine both going down. I don't think that lands archetypes are going to suddenly pop up, but having more Strip Mines helps to punish greed and also just helps to make some of those aggro decks really take the knees out from underneath the mid-range decks that are just looking to get these haymakers into play that are admittedly kind of clunky if their mana is being taken out from underneath them. Strip Mine being Wasteland number 2 is honestly a really good thing. So that's kind of my predictions. My predictions are we're going to see less recall. We're going to see less fourth, except in the fair decks that had a point to spare anyway. Basically, Seeker Walk might show up, but I don't think it's going to break anything. Demonic Tutor Natural Order is kind of cool. I like seeing more Strip Mine, but I don't think there's going to. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of experimentation with combo decks for a while, and then people are going to play the decks that beat the combo decks, and then we'll see what goes from there. Academy-based decks, like artifact decks like Time Vault and Paradox Academy, really didn't get hit very hard. They didn't get boosts or they didn't get any buffs or nerfs, but they did sort of prey on the Ancestral Recall blue decks, and if those see less play, then maybe they will see less play as well. Time Vault might not be as good when it's not preying on Ancestral Recall decks and is instead losing to Collector Roof decks. Who knows? Overall, one thing I want to say is that the picture that I've sort of painted by going through the year is that there's a lot of everything on the Discord is dominated by blue. You have to play blue or you have to play combo, and that's just not true. The Discord meta, like any other meta, is a local meta. Obviously it's weird to say that when it has people from all across the world, but it's dominated by some players who are very good. And those players who are very good tend to be the blue players or the combo players. And so it's not like you can't play other decks and have success with them. It's just that these are the ones that happen to be showing up the most because they're the ones that are favored by the strongest players who would be good with pretty much any archetype that they pick up. I do think that this opens up, these point changes open up a lot of brewing, and I'm kind of excited to see what 2024 brings because I think Highlander is very far from being a solved format, and that there's a lot of room for people to test all kinds of new brews, and having a giant points list change like this is just a great way to shake up everything. Okay, so that was a lot. That was pretty much my entire presentation. If you weren't familiar with the Canadian Highlander Discord, there's going to be a link here. I'm also going to put all these links in the description, as well as a link to this PowerPoint, well, it's a Google Slides presentation in the description. Most of the data is from the Highlander Winners Archive profile. There's an invite to the Canadian Highlander Discord, and even to my Google Docs outline, where there's some more comments on things that I didn't think were relevant enough to talk about in this video, but were relevant enough to note in my outline. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble about the Discord metagame for however long this has been. If you have any thoughts about things that I might have missed, or ideas or decks that you think I didn't talk about enough, feel free to comment or to message me on the Discord at Cyclops8. And hope you enjoyed. Have a good day, everyone.